Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanatoni Yamuna Tira Vanatoni Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Devara Jani Yashodanandana Rajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanatoni Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you. Okay. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakatarya Ashtottara Shata Shri Srimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajakatarya Ashtottara Shata Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Srila Gorakishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Vaishnava Sarvabhuma Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai. Jaya Shri Rupa Sanata Jaya Shri Rupa Sanata Bhatta Raghunatha Shri Jiva Gopala Bhatta Das Raghunath Sad Goswami Prabhu Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopana Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Ganga Maya Ki Jai. Yamuna Maya Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Devi Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai. Gurunath Raj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. ISKCON Bhartma Guru Vrinda Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Gora Pramanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru, Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayana Namaskritya Naram Jaiva Narottamam Devam Saraswatam Vyasam Chito Jayam Yuridayat Rasta Preshu Abatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Nashtiki. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead Narayan, and unto Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author by regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, and by the rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed. In loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. All right. Welcome, everybody. Pretty small class here today. Today is November 17th, 2024. And we are reading Canto 4, Creation of the Fourth Order, Chapter 25, the descriptions of the characteristics of King Puranjana. And we'll be doing verse 4 today. Let's see. Okay. Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Karmanatmana ihase
Karmanatmana ihase
Dukahani sukhavapti
Dukahani sukhavati
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Karmanatmana ihase
Karmanatmana ihase
Dukahani sukhavapti
Dukahani sukhavati
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Karmanatmana ihase
Karmanatmana ihase
Dukahani sukhavapti
Dukahani sukhavati
Shreyastane hacheshyate.
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Okay, please repeat.
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Shreyastvam katamad rajan Karmanatmana ihase
Dukahani sukhavati
Dukahani sukhavapti
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Karmanatmana ihase
Karmanatmana ihase
Dukahani sukhavati
Dukahani sukhavapti
Shreyastane hacheshyate
Shreyastane hacheshyate.
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Shreyastvam katamad rajan
Karmanatma ahiyase
Karmanatmana ihase
Dukahani sukhavati
Dukahani sukhavapti
Shreyastaneha Shisate
Shreyastane hacheshyate. All right, you want to try? No? All right. We almost had 100%. All right. Still, we have 75%. Okay. Word for word. Shreya,
Shreya
ultimate benediction.
Ultimate benediction
Tvam,
From
you.
You
Katamat,
Katama
what is that?
What is that?
Rajan.
Raja
O king.
O King,
Karmana,
Karmana,
by fruit of activities.
fruit activities,
Atmanaha,
Atmana,
of the soul.
of the soul,
Ihase,
Ihase,
you desire.
you desire,
Dukahani,
Dukahani,
disappearance of all distresses.
disappearance of all distresses,
Sukha abhapti,
Sukhavati,
attainment of all happiness.
attainment of all happiness,
Shreya,
Shreya,
benediction.
benediction,
Tat,
Tat,
that.
that,
Na,
Na
never.
never,
Iha,
Iha,
in this connection.
in this connection
Cha,
Cha
and
and
Ishyate,
Ishate
is available.
is available.
Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Cha
Narada Muni asked King Prachinabarashat, "My dear king, what do you desire to achieve by performing these fruitive activities? The chief aim of life is to get rid of all miseries and enjoy happiness, but these two things cannot be realized by fruitive activity. Please repeat." Narada Muni
Narada
asked King Prachinabarashat,
asked King Prachinabarashat,
"My dear king,
my dear king,
what do you desire to achieve
what do you desire to achieve
by performing these fruitive activities?
by performing these fruitive activities?
The chief aim of life
The chief aim of life
is to get rid of all miseries and enjoy happiness.
is to get rid of all miseries and enjoy happiness.
But these two things cannot be realized
But these two things cannot be realized
by fruitive activity.
by fruitive activities.
Purport. In this material world, there is a great illusion which covers real intelligence. A man in the mode of passion wants to work very hard to derive some benefit, but he does not know that time will never allow him to enjoy anything permanently. Compared with the work one expends, the gain is not so profitable. Even if it is profitable, it is not without its distresses. If a man is not born rich and he wants to purchase a house, cars, and other material things, he has to work hard day and night for many years in order to possess them. Thus, happiness is not attained without undergoing some distress. Actually, pure happiness cannot be had within this material world. If we wish to enjoy something, we must suffer for something else. On the whole, suffering is the nature of this material world, and whatever enjoyment we are trying to achieve is simply illusion. After all, we have to suffer the miseries of birth, old age, disease, and death. We may discover many fine medicines, but it is not possible to stop the sufferings of disease or death. Actually, medicine is not the counteracting agent for either disease or death. On the whole, there is no happiness in this material world, but an illusion person works very hard for so-called happiness. Indeed, this process of working hard is actually taken for happiness. This is called illusion. Therefore, Narada Muni asked King Prachinabarashat what he desired to attain by performing so many costly sacrifices. Even if one attains to a heavenly planet, he cannot avoid the distresses of birth, old age, disease, and death. Someone may argue that even devotees have to undergo many distresses in executing austerities and penances connected with devotional service. Of course, for the neophytes, the routine of devotional service may be very painful, but at least they have the hope that they will ultimately be able to avoid all kinds of distresses and achieve the highest perfectional stage of happiness. For the common karmis, there is no such hope, because even if they are promoted to the higher planetary systems, they are not guaranteed freedom from the miseries of birth, old age, disease, and death. Even Lord Brahma, who is situated in the highest planetary system, Brahmaloka, has to die. Lord Brahma's birth and death may be different from an ordinary man's, but within this material world, he cannot avoid the distresses of birth, old age, disease, and death. If one is at all serious about attaining liberation from these miseries, he must take to devotional service. This is confirmed by the Lord himself in Bhagavad Gita 4:9. Janma karma cha divyam evam yo vekti tatpata bhaktva deham punarjanma naiti mam etir surjana. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Thus, after attaining full Krishna consciousness, the devotee does not return to this material world after death. He goes back home, back to Godhead. This is the perfect stage of happiness, unblemished by any traces of distress. Om Jnana Timirandasa Jnana Shalakaya Chakshara Militam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatan Sahagana Raganutam Tam Sajivam Savadetam Savadutam Parijana Sahatam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabando Jagapate Gopesha Gopeka Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Rangi Radhe Vrinda Vineshwari Rishabhanu Suta Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Namaste Jai Okay, so in this verse we see that Narada Muni is telling King Prachinabarshad that the chief aim of life is to get rid of miseries and enjoy happiness, but that can't be achieved with fruitive or material activities. So this is the aim of life for pretty much every living entity on this planet, right? Is to get rid of miseries and to be happy. I mean, that's what pretty much all living entities on this earth want to do. But for the pure devotee, the goal of life is actually to serve Krishna and to get love of Krishna and to give love to Krishna, even if they're in a hellish condition. So even if they're facing miseries, the pure devotee just wants to serve and love Krishna. But for the vast majority of life on this planet, the aim of life is just to get rid of those miseries and to be happy. So for the pure devotee that does pure devotional service, the natural byproduct of that is actually to have happiness and a cessation of misery. So although that's not the goal for the pure devotee, you end up with that anyway. So true knowledge is being able to distinguish between what is spirit and what is matter, what is eternal and what is temporary. So let's see here. Let me get my notes. So in the third chapter of Bhagavad Gita, this is from the purport from 310. The Lord created this material world to enable the conditioned souls to learn how to perform yagyas, or sacrifices, for the satisfaction of Vishnu, so that while in this material world, they can live comfortably without anxiety, and after finishing the present material body, they can enter into the kingdom of God. That is the whole program for the conditioned soul. By performance of yajna, the conditioned souls gradually become Krishna conscious and become godly in all respects. In the age of Kali, the Sankirtan Yajna, the chanting of the holy names of God, is recommended by the Vedic scriptures. And this transcendental system was introduced by Lord Chaitanya for the deliverance of all men in this age. Sankirtan Yajna and Krishna consciousness go well together. Lord Krishna and his devotional form as Lord Chaitanya, mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam as follows, with special reference to the Sankirtan Yajna. In this age of Kali, people who are endowed with significant intelligence will worship the Lord, who is accompanied by his associates by performances of Sankirtan Yajna. Other yajnas prescribed in the Vedic literatures are not easy to perform in this age of Kali, but the Sankirtan Yajna is easy and sublime for all purposes, as recommended in Bhagavad Gita. So we can see from that part of that purport that this whole material world was made so that we can learn to do that, so we can learn to make sacrifices for Krishna. But most people are not doing that. They're making sacrifices for their own happiness, right? As Srila Prabhupada said in the purport to today's verse, if you want to have a nice car or a place, you have to work for so hard to do this, right? And now we see currently things are getting much harder, right? Things are far more expensive. Things have skyrocketed in price. Wages have remained the same. And there's people that are working, 2 or 3 jobs, and they still can't afford to rent a place, let alone buy a house, right? And so they're working very hard, and they're still miserable. And if they're lucky, maybe they have a few hours off on the weekend or something up from their 3 jobs that maybe they can do a little bit of enjoyment, whether that's, go to the bar and have a few drinks, or go meet with their boy or girlfriend, or go out to the park, something like that. But overall, their life's pretty miserable because they're working DoorDash, they're working, as, maybe a medical assistant, and then they're also driving Uber, right? This is like real stuff that people are doing, and they're still not able to rent a place, or if they are, it's with, several roommates, which anyone that's had roommates knows that can be quite challenging at times. So what we need to do is that true knowledge, learning to discern what is spirit, what is eternal, spirit, and what is matter, what is temporary. And then we need to serve the eternal and not the temporary. So doing what most people are doing in this age is kind of useless. It isn't kind of useless, it is useless, because you're serving the temporary body. You're just trying to get some little bit of happiness, take it when you can, right? And this is a little bit like, imagine you were out at some event, and God forbid there was a shooting, right? You get shot, and you're laying on the ground, and you're bleeding out, you're gonna die. And suddenly the ambulance comes, and you're like, oh, thank God, the ambulance is here, paramedics are here. The paramedics get out of the ambulance, and they just hand you a pillow and a cup of hot cocoa, and maybe one of those portable DVD players, and they put on a nice movie for you. Okay, well, oh, that's very nice, but I'm bleeding to death here. Can you maybe stop the bleeding first? And they're just trying to make you comfortable. And so that's foolish, right? That's totally ridiculous. And that's sort of what we're doing in our everyday lives when we're just trying to serve our bodies and make sure that we get a little bit of comfort. We're actually like bleeding to death, but we're just kind of ignoring that and saying, oh no, I will just take this sense gratification instead of stopping the bleeding, which is, stopping the bleeding would be taking up a spiritual practice and serving what's eternal rather than what's temporary. And so all the pleasures that we have in the material world have some element of misery in them. I was thinking about, the cruise industry, right? Which a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to go on this big boat, and they have, all you can eat buffets and like free drinks, and it's going to be so nice, and even if your cruise goes perfectly well, and the food's great, and the drinks are nice, and the people are nice on your boat, still that whole industry is polluting the world so badly. It's polluting our oceans. And even if you don't care about pollution, still you have the norovirus, right? People get sick all the time on cruises, and they spend the whole time stuck in their room because stomach virus goes through the entire ship, right? And you spend thousands of dollars to stay in your tiny little room and just be sick. Can't even enjoy it, the buffets. And if that doesn't happen, sometimes from what I hear, the food's actually not that good. So, that's just one example of you're trying to enjoy by going on this nice cruise, and there's some misery there. There's the nice story about a camel, right? A camel is chewing on thorns. And he's chewing on thorns, and he's thinking, wow, these are some good thorns. They sure do taste good. But really what he's tasting is his own blood, because he's eating those thorns, and the thorns are pricking him, and his own blood is filling his mouth. But he's enjoying it. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing when we're trying to enjoy the material energy. We're just eating thorns. So Srila Prabhupada has likened the material world to a prison house with different grades of cells. There's the hole, which is like, you don't want to go there, right? There's no nobody to talk to there. It's usually cold. They usually don't even give you a blanket. You're just all by yourself. It's dark. And then there's maybe, you get a dorm cell where you have a lot of other prisoners with you, and you get a job, nice cushy job, maybe in the prison library. That seems okay, nice, much better than being in the hole, right? But that's what the material world is like. It's like some cells might be better than the others, but we're still prisoners. So let's hear a little bit about the heavenly planets. I found this nice description of the heavenly planets. Makes it sound pretty nice, like a cell that I might want to go to. I don't know. We'll see. So this is from an article from Back to Godhead. The happiness and pleasures experienced by the denizens of heaven are immensely superior to the happiness found on earth. The chief of the administrative demigods, Indra, is the king of heaven. In Indraloka, the planet where Indra resides, there are Nandanakana gardens where one can associate with angelic, beautiful women. And I'm assuming also men, I don't know. But one can associate with angelic, beautiful women and enjoy a profuse supply of somarasa wine, a celestial beverage. There are magnificent palaces, huge gardens with aromatic flowers, beautiful landscapes, etc. There are Gandharvas, celestial beings who sing melodious music all the time. These are the pleasures in the paradise of Indraloka. As one goes further above and beyond Indraloka into the different celestial realms, the senses and their objects become more subtle, and the quality of sense enjoyment becomes greatly refined. In contrast to those heavenly planets, the sense enjoyment on planet Earth is insignificant and is experienced on an extremely gross level. Another feature of the higher planets is the difference in time scale. Modern scientists also agree that the timing arrangement in other planets is different from that of Earth. 6 months on Earth is equal to 1 day or 12 hours on the heavenly planets. The duration of life there is 10,000 years by our calculation. And the miseries of this planet, Earth, birth, old age, disease, and death, exist even there. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, from the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery wherein repeated birth and death take place. The Srimad Bhagavatam describes various incidents where the demigods are frequently attacked by powerful demons, and in the ensuing war many times, the demigods lose the battle, and as a result, they lose their prestigious positions as controllers of the universe and are in constant anxiety. Srila Prabhupada compared this material world to a prison house. In a prison house, there are different grades of cells for different criminals. Depending on the severity of the crime, the criminal is put into a certain cell. Most horrible cells for the severest crime committed. And similarly, the universe acts like a prison house where the rebellious living entities are sent to reform themselves and rectify their mistakes. Depending on his past activities, he's put into a certain living condition where he enjoys or suffers the results of his acts. For extremely pious acts, he is sent to heaven where he enjoys godly delights. And for sinful acts, he goes to hell and suffers there. The sad thing, however, is that even if someone becomes qualified to enter heaven, he will not be allowed to stay there permanently. Once his accumulated pious credits are exhausted, he is forced to return to earth and start over again. Lord Krishna explains this in Bhagavad Gita 9:21. When they have thus enjoyed vast heavenly sense pleasures and the result of their pious activities are exhausted, they return to this mortal planet again. Thus, those who seek sense enjoyment by adhering to the principles of the three Vedas achieve only repeated birth and death. Okay, so even though things are really wonderful in this heavenly planets, it's still temporary. So even if everything's just going well, which they don't always go well, there's wars, and the demigods, they lose their positions because of these wars, and they're not able to enjoy the heavenly planet like they wanted to, right? And when that's all over, then they have to take birth again. So they die and they take birth again. So in Christianity, right, they say that you can't get to heaven by good works, that you have to get there by the mercy of the Lord. But the Vedas do tell us that we can get to heaven by good works, but it's temporary and the misery is still there. So the material world means misery. That's what Srila Prabhupada said in this purport. And the Srimad Bhagavatam also says this in the 4th canto, which actually is in a few chapters ahead of this, and of the chapter that we're on now. It says, the living entities are trying to counteract different miserable conditions by pertaining to providence. Other living entities or the body and mind, still they must remain conditioned by the laws of nature, despite all attempts to counter these laws. So we know that people are trying their hardest to counteract this misery in some way, right? They're trying by getting new cars, by having a new girl or boyfriend, right? I mean, there's so many, the dating world is so crazy, right? There's people just having strings of partners because they're just find something wrong with this one. Oh, I'm just going to take the next one. We'll try the next one, see if it's a better match. But ultimately, they're never satisfied, right? They just keep trying and trying to satisfy themselves, and it's just not working. And that's because they're servicing the temporary body instead of the eternal, which is the soul. So, okay. So a little bit from a purport from that same verse I just read. Just as a dog wanders here and there for a piece of bread or punishment, the living entity perpetually wanders about trying to be happy and planning so many ways to counteract this material misery. This is called the struggle for existence. We can actually see in our daily lives how we're forced to make plans to drive away miserable conditions. To get rid of one miserable condition, we have to put ourselves in another kind of miserable condition. So we see this, right? When we look at the very wealthy, right? What do their houses look like? The very, very wealthy, their houses usually have big, huge fences around them or big, huge walls around them, big, huge gates and cameras everywhere. And that's because they're in anxiety. They're in anxiety that they're going to lose everything they've accumulated, right? Meanwhile, I have pretty much nothing and I leave my door open all the time. I'm not in anxiety about that. But as you accumulate more things, you become enslaved to them, and you just become enslaved to now you have to say you've accumulated some more things. Well, now you have to work harder so you can get a bigger house to fit all your things. And now you have to keep working harder so you can maintain that house. And maybe you may want to take on some staff or something like that to help maintain and protect your house. And all this, you're in anxiety. Even people that have more money than entire countries are in extreme anxiety about losing this money, right? They're constantly trying to make friends with politicians so they can have a say and perhaps influencing their ability to say whether or not their vast wealth gets taxed, right? And that's what most people are going after. They're saying, oh, if I had so much money, I would be happy. So many people say that all the time. Talk about if they won the lottery, what they would do with it. But it doesn't make us happy. It's called the hedonistic treadmill, right? You're just running, and you're running faster and faster and faster, but you're never satisfying that need, just filling yourself with things. So let's see. So I'd really like this verse too. A man may carry a burden on his head. When he feels it to be too heavy, he sometimes gives relief to his head by putting the burden on his shoulder. In this way, he tries to relieve himself of the burden. However, whatever process he devises to counteract the burden does nothing more than put the same burden from one place to another. So we see this happening when it comes to like environmental issues, right? People are trying to solve pollution issues. All our vehicles using gasoline and fossil fuels is causing so much pollution. So they're saying, okay, let's have electric vehicles. But electric vehicles have issues too, right? There's toxic ingredients in those batteries that that we're using. So just sort of trading one set of problems for a new set of problems. And that's all we end up doing. So I wanted to tell the story of King Chitraketu because he was really concerned with the temporary, as most kings are. They are really concerned about having a son, right? Having a successor. And King Chitraketu, he had 10 million wives. 10 million wives, that's amazing. I don't know. It seems like most men complain about being able to keep one wife happy. Could you imagine trying to keep 10 million wives happy? Oh man. Anyway, he had 10 million wives and he didn't have one son. And he wanted a son so badly. And this was preoccupying his mind constantly. He was just thinking about how badly he wanted a son. And one day this great sage Angira comes by and he can sort of understands, okay, this king, he really wants a son. You know, maybe I can give him a boon and help him out. So the great sage Angira, he gives the king a boon, and he holds a big sacrifice to help the king have a son. And then the remnants of the food that was used in the sacrifice, he feeds to he gives to one of the wives of king. He eats it. And Angira says, "O great king, now you will have a son who will be the cause of both jubilation and lamentation." And then he left. And so naturally, shortly after this, the wife that ate the remnants from that sacrifice, she became pregnant. And the king was very happy. And after some time, a son was born. And the whole kingdom was so happy. The king was just overwhelmed with happiness. And the whole kingdom was just celebrating, having a big festival. Everything was going great. And the king spent so much time with his son, you know, teaching his son, playing with his son, just really gloriously happy. And finally, he had this son that he had wanted for so long. And naturally, because he wanted to spend, he ended up spending a lot more time with his son's mother, that one particular wife. And he began to love her more than he loved the other wives because she had provided him with a son. And he started neglecting the other 10 million wives, 10 million minus one. And after a while, those wives, they tolerated it for a little while. But after a while, they started to really be jealous and disheartened. And they lost all their kind of good, pious qualities. And they decided amongst themselves that they were going to poison this son. Yeah. And so they did. They poisoned him, and he died. And I want to read a little bit about the lamentation that came over the palace. In great lamentation, her hair and dress in disarray, the queen fell to the ground unconscious. O King Parikshit, hearing the loud crying, all the inhabitants of the palace came, both men and women, being equally aggrieved. They also began to cry. The queens who had administered the poison also cried portentously, knowing full well their offense. When King Chitraketu heard of his son's death from unknown causes, he became almost blind. Because of his great affection for his son, his lamentation grew like a blazing fire. And as he went to see the dead child, he kept slipping and falling on the ground. Surrounded by his ministers and other officers, and the learned brahmanas present, the king approached and fell unconscious at the child's feet, his hair and his dress scattered. When the king, breathing heavily, regained consciousness, his eyes were tearful and he could not speak. When the queen's husband, King Chitraketu, merged into great lamentation and saw the dead child, who was the only son in the family, she lamented in various ways. This increased the pain in the cores of the hearts of all the inhabitants of the palace, the ministers and all the brahmanas. So you can hear, I mean, the whole palace was just completely distraught at the loss of this little prince. Just so much lamentation. Even the wives that killed him, they were lamenting too, even though they were the ones that did it, right? So what ended up happening after this is that Angira and Narada Muni come, the great sage Angira, and Narada Muni comes and tries to instruct the king a little bit about the temporary nature of the material world and you know, how everything is temporary, even our relationships with each other, right? Even the relationship of father and son or husband and wife. But they could see that this wasn't really going to relieve the king's lamentation. And so what they ended up doing was bringing the son back to his body. They managed to get the soul back in the body using their mystic powers. And the son began to speak to his father. And let's see, I want to read what his son says. First, a little bit about him getting back in his body. It says, by the mystic power of Narada Muni, the living entity re-entered his dead body for a short time and spoke in reply to Narada Muni's request. He said, according to the results of my fruitive activities, I, the living being, transmigrate from one body to another, sometimes going to the species of the demigods, sometimes to the species of lower animals, and sometimes among the vegetables, and sometimes to the human species. Therefore, in which birth were these my mother and father? No one is actually my mother and father. How can I accept these two people as my parents? Now, could you imagine your son has just died and somehow his soul was recalled back to his body and that's what he says? That would be quite shocking and probably hurt quite a bit to hear your son say, how can I accept these two people as my parents? He continues, even though one living entity becomes connected with another because of a relationship based on bodies that are perishable, the living entity is eternal. Actually, it is the body that is born or lost, not the living entity. One should not accept that the living entity takes birth or dies. The living being actually has no relationship with so-called fathers and mothers. As long as he appears as the son of a certain father and mother as a result of his past fruitive activities, he has a connection with the body given by that father and mother. Thus, he falsely accepts himself as their son and acts affectionately. After he dies, however, the relationship is finished. Under these circumstances, one should not be falsely involved with jubilation and lamentation. So again, hearing your son say these things would be very shocking. But this is the reality, right? And so we spend so much time focusing our energy and our mind and our body and everything into things that have to do with the temporary instead of things that have to do with the eternal. And this ends up giving us so much misery and so much pain. Now that doesn't mean, don't love your children. Of course, you should love your children, but at the same time, understand that your relationship with them is temporary. And when it comes time for you to go through birth, old age, disease, and death, you're doing that alone. You're not going to be doing that with others, right? So what ended up happening is that the king and the other people in the palace that had heard these things, they had, and the rest of the family, they were able to, as it says, cut off the shackles of their affection. And the king was then able to focus on spiritual matters. And he ended up being able to see the Lord face to face in quite a short time. And that was because he focused on what was eternal and not what was temporary. And so I guess the whole purport of this class is if you want eternal happiness, then we need to focus on that which is eternal. If you want temporary happiness, well, then I guess you can focus on what is temporary. But that's also going to come with misery. And ultimately, we should desire to serve Krishna in any situation, whether we're in misery or we're in the hellish planets or we're in the heavenly planets. We should desire to serve Krishna and love Krishna. And that ultimately will give us eternal happiness and cessation of misery. So I think I'll end there. It's a little bit, a few minutes early, but yeah, others about me.
That reminds me of the story when King Indra was misbehaving and Lord Brahma had him take a body of a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And then later when his punishment was over, he went to retrieve him back from the lower planets. And he was like, wait a minute, I'm so happy here. I got my piglets, I got my pig wife. And so Lord Brahma thought, oh, what am I going to do? We need him up there. He's our big administrator. So he actually killed all the piglets.
Oh, God.
And it was like such a shock, just like Chitraketu. That shock of that reality was painful, but it elevated one's consciousness to see that everything is temporary in this material world. So after that happened, then Indra regained his consciousness and then, of course, agreed to go back to the heavenly planets. So if we don't do it voluntarily, Krishna will do it forcibly.
Yeah.
So better volunteer.
Absolutely. I always love that story too, because I feel like I could really relate to that story because, I've been in so many really kind of miserable circumstances in my life, and I would just think like, oh, it's not so bad, I can deal with this, it's not so bad. And we see like that is basically the condition that we're all living in, is we're living in these kind of miserable conditions and thinking, oh no, it's good, I mean, so many people, they don't even understand, the misery that they're living in. They think, okay, well, I have a nice job, I have a car, nice wife, nice kids, nice dog, nice house. But really, their kids are, probably going to be terrible teenagers, giving them a hard time, and their dog's going to die, and their wife's going to, lose her beauty, and these things. And that's it, I mean, these things are just ultimately happening. And then the other part, for some reason, I didn't know that he had to kill the piglets to get him to come back. I never heard that part of the story. That's really shocking. But pain can be a great catalyst to help people understand, the temporary nature of this world. And, I remember when that war in Ukraine started, sometimes I have inappropriate reactions to things, but I remember thinking like, oh, this is good news. And it wasn't because I thought, I wanted people to be hurt or killed or anything like that, but I felt like, sometimes that's what it takes to like wake people up from their life and say, oh my gosh, what is going on? Why does these terrible things keep happening? Maybe I should try to figure out why this is happening and how it can be remedied, which is by getting out of this material world. So anyway, is there any other questions, comments? Okay, that's good.
I'm trying to form a question. It's something about balancing the eternal and the relative, because it's very easy to become sentimental and die in just bodily consciousness, and it's very easy to just think, nothing else, nobody matters, nothing matters. It's just me and Krishna. So those are both extreme positions. You made one comment. I don't think you meant it the way I took it, but I took it. You said something like we all die alone.
Oh, uh-huh.
No, I mean, if we're lucky, we die with devotees who are trying to help us remember
I
Krishna.
mean, we all go through the cycle of samsara alone. Like, I mean, we're not, you know, me and my son are not going to go together lifetime
right,
after
yeah.
lifetime.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by that. Not,
Yeah.
you know, so forming that attachment is necessary, of course, to raise the son, but you should know that we're not going to be
Yeah.
together for all eternity.
Yeah. In our generation, it was very common, when we joined, to just, to say, oh, you're not my dad, you're not my mom, and just alienate them.
Yeah.
And actually, it was kind of violence on them because we were not recognizing. Because Prabhupada, like Rukmini, my Gossage, tells a story when she went to when Jamuna and Malati introduced Rukmini to Wendy at the time to Swamiji in Montreal in '68. She's only 16, and Jamuna said, "This is Wendy, and she wants to be your disciple." And so the first thing Rukmini says now that Prabhupada said, "Where are your parents?" Like, what are you doing? You're alone? You just came? And so Rukmini said, yeah, I had rebelled. I was just a wild hippie, like, so many of us. But Prabhupada was concerned about what her parents, and she hadn't graduated high school or anything, So the absolute and the relative considerations have to be there. Otherwise, the whole thing's imbalanced.
Yeah, of course, because although we're spiritual beings, we are currently in this material world. So that means we have material bodies. We need to take care of our material bodies and our material relationships. Yeah. But at the same time, realize that this is all temporary, and we're not going to be eternally in these bodies and not eternally have these relationships. But that doesn't mean like just be cold and be standoffish to your family, to your children, to your parents, no, you want to have nice relationships with everybody. It kind of makes me think of, sometimes there's like, there's this trope of the overbearing mother that really wants her child to be, a doctor or a lawyer or something like that, right? She just loves this child so much, and she just really wants them to be a doctor or a lawyer, and they want to be an artist or something like that, and that mother's, trying to force her will on that child and make them that doctor or lawyer, and then that child ends up being miserable, and that relationship is strained.
Yeah.
And whereas that mother could simply love her child, but be detached and realize her child has their own life and their own desires and their own path. And that's kind of more of we want to lean towards more of that kind of relationship with our loved ones, where we can love them, but be detached and not trying to hold them so close, that we're suffocating that relationship. So,
right. Sort
of analogous to that. All right, is there any more comments or questions? All right, we will end here. Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai.